In today's video, I want to talk about a recent study that shows a phenomenon that explains a sizable amount of unhappiness in not only retirement, but ultimately life. I think topics around well-being and happiness are just as important, if not more important, than the videos we do on saving on taxes or growing your retirement assets more efficiently. Yes, the quantitative side of retirement planning is critical, but if we are reaching wealth milestones and it's not translating to experiencing a better life, then what the heck is it all for? The study I want to talk about in today's video is one that is being labeled as the blue dot effect. This was based off a recent Harvard study, and here is how it was designed. Starting out, participants were shown dots like the ones on the screen and asked whether the dot was blue or purple. As a baseline, the first round of trials showed an equal number of blue dots and purple dots, and participants were accurate in identifying the differences. In the subsequent 4 rounds of trials, however, the number of blue dots shown steadily dropped. Despite this, participants identified approximately the same number of blue dots as before. Participants were told there would be more purple dots and were even offered money based on accuracy. Still, participants continued to misidentify purple dots as blue. Okay, so what does this mean? Couldn't this simply be an optical illusion? So researchers expanded the study to other domains. They ran the same general test, but this time looking at threatening or non-threatening faces. First round had an equal number of both, and participant guesses were recorded and accurate. Then the number of non-threatening faces were increased, and despite this, participants started labeling objectively non-threatening faces as now threatening. Humans don't judge things on an absolute basis, but rather we judge things on a relative basis. Your brain is constantly recalibrating and effectively distorting your perception based on priors. Most of us find ourselves aware of this bias when we look in the domain of money. For instance, take your level of wealth and examine that level just inside of a box. Maybe you have a few $100,000 saved for retirement, maybe you have millions. On its own, in absolute terms, you might be pretty satisfied with that level of wealth. But as the study shows, humans struggle to look at things on an absolute basis alone. So now we look at things and compare to a neighbor, friend, or even some random person on the internet. You might see that they have 30% more wealth than you. Now all of a sudden, the satisfaction with our own situation drops despite there being no change in our objective reality. In the editing phase, I realized that it might be helpful to include an extra addendum just to make the implications of the study clear. Researchers found across multiple domains that your brain is constantly recalibrating and raising its standards. This isn't just the case with colored dots, threatening faces, or wealth. This has broader applications. As your world improves or even your life improves, you will examine that life and uncover problems that weren't previously problems. Dan Gilbert, a leading researcher on happiness and one of the authors of this study, had this to say: solving problems causes us to expand our definitions of them. When problems become rare, we count more things as problems. Our study suggests that when the world gets better, we become harsher critics of it, and this can cause us to mistakenly conclude it actually hasn't gotten better at all. Progress, it seems, tends to mask itself. This is the whole idea around champagne problems. Problems or negative views around your situation will always exist no matter how much objective improvement there is in your life. Our brains are problem-seeking vehicles, it appears. At a basic stage of retirement wealth, your main question is whether you have enough to fund your essential living expenses. This is obviously a weighty and critical question. But once it's obvious that you have enough wealth to cover that goal, the next problem is whether you have enough to cover your discretionary expenses. And if the answer isn't a resounding yes, that problem will weigh just as heavy as if you're not able to cover your essential income goal. Keep growing your wealth, and then saving on taxes becomes the new problem. Obviously a better problem to have, but your mind won't think so. It weighs all of these problems, survival and champagne problems, very similarly. This is effectively the premise behind the concept of the hedonic treadmill. We all have a baseline of happiness around, let's say, 6 to 7 out of 10. As our life improves, our expectation rises to meet that improvement. This is why we keep moving the goalposts. We think having $1 million will make us happy. We achieve that milestone, maybe we feel great for a day or a week if we're lucky, and then we go back to our baseline. There's a trend I notice amongst a large share of retirees. They essentially bounce back and forth between 2 states in retirement. As I'm explaining this, do me a favor and reflect on if you fall into this camp. When the economy and stock market aren't doing great, like in 2008, the first half of 2020, or in 2022, these retirees are in a objective, but also psychological state where they are recovering from a downturn. They take a more conservative view. They're more cautious in everything from investing to spending. They tighten their belts a bit and use the reasoning that things are tough out there. And this stance is logical to some degree. It's not a bad idea to be more conservative when things are nasty. But then we start to see things bounce back. It took a bit longer after 2008, but as we sit here in 2024, stock market is reaching new highs, completely recovered from the 2022 lows. Because of this, many people are seeing all-time highs in wealth. If you were a third party viewing the situation from above, you would think that this would be a time of bliss and optimism. Let's let our hair down and enjoy our wealth. You maybe have been dreaming of that family vacation for a while now. Well, if you don't have the confidence to pursue and enjoy wealth when you're at an all-time high, when will you possibly have the confidence? But instead, I find so many retirees just simply bounce back to the other state of mind, preparing for the next downturn. Sure, we are at a stock market high, but things can turn pretty quickly. Both states end up with some form of worrying and focusing on just the next problem. Given this, there's barely any room for enjoyment. Let me say this a different way. If you are at or near an all-time high in wealth and you aren't able to enjoy it or appreciate what you've gained, then what are we doing? Our pursuit of wealth has failed us. And I don't know about you, but there are few things more depressing to me than someone who is achieving awesome and amazing things in absolute terms, but is unable to enjoy or appreciate those achievements. And look, this trend translates outside of finances as well if we just simply zoom out. Objectively speaking, there's never been a better time to be alive. If we compare ourselves to someone slightly in front of us in some domain of life, we can find ourselves depressed by that relative comparison. But what if we compare ourselves to someone much further ahead of us, but rather in a previous generation? A low-income person in America today has a better existence than a king did just a few generations ago. But if you watch the news or talk to certain pessimists or read the doomsday predictions of today, you'd think the world is in a downward spiral to nothingness. Yet today, our biggest problems stem from problems of abundance rather than problems of scarcity. And bringing this back to finance, it's amazing how the psychological side of personal finance can often translate to better or worse decisions on the quantitative side. They are intertwined. The blue dot effect we are discussing here can cause one to be more pessimistic. And pessimism has a massive cost. Look, there will always be reasons for concern and uncertainty. You have a lack of imagination if right now you can't pick out 3 major problems or concerns or risks in the economy. But rarely do those concerns translate to anything material. The stock market, and in turn capitalism, is incredibly robust at taking problems and spitting them out the other end. If you're someone who's worried about the future, or you think an economic downturn is coming, do me a favor and reflect back on the last time you felt this. It was probably pretty recent, maybe 2022. The news stories through 2022 and 2023 were all about how weak the economy was becoming. Layoffs were happening. Negative this, negative that, yet here we sit today. Or maybe it was back during the COVID crash of 2020. Predictions from so-called experts were massively negative. The great hedge fund manager George Soros said this will be the worst bear market of his entire life. Yet all of these predictions were wrong. 2020 was a positive year in the stock market after all of that. 4 years later, the market had more than doubled from the COVID lows. If you were pessimistic along the way and allowed that to drive your wealth strategy, your subjective feelings resulted in objectively less wealth. And the worst thing about pessimism is that it compounds, it spirals. Say you were someone who shifted to more bonds or cash during COVID or sometime in 2022. You now have less wealth due to that pessimism. If we compare this to a realist would think, look, no one can accurately predict the market. So the best move is simply set up a diversified portfolio that best fits my situation. And then my responsibility is to stick to that portfolio and that plan for the best results. Well, in the relative comparison that we all do, the pessimist will now feel worse on their position relative to the realist because the gap between the two is now widened based on their decisions. This negative comparison will now beget more pessimism, which in turn will lead to a widening gap in the future. It appears that this blue dot effect is simply hardwired into us. Our human brain is a problem-seeking vehicle. Again, this is hardwired into us. Well, I don't have any quick fixes, but I do have practices that can take you out of some of that negativity. The first is to stress test your plan. Take every fear or problem that you see down the road and see if it even matters in your objective well-being. Worried about Social Security solvency and how it affects your retirement? Well, if Social Security is indeed cut in 2034, what effect does that change have? What if your retirement is still completely fine? What if your optimal filing strategy barely shifts? It's not something that deserves your concern if this is the case. If you're worried about a stock market crash, but your plan shows that your retirement would have survived every previous stock market crash, again, does this concern deserve your worry? Stress testing can help stop these concerns right in their tracks and at least give us the data to be a little bit more objective here. Then on the more psychological side, when you feel a concern or desire arising, practice pausing and reversing that desire. Realize that everything sucks a little bit, and the hedonic treadmill is going to always keep you at a 6 or 7 out of 10 in terms of happiness. At some point in your life, you desired what you already have. What if rather than moving that desire again, we kept the previous desired and continued to desire what we currently have? This is essentially a practice in gratitude. It's the focus on the gain that we've already achieved rather than the focus on the gap to the next desire. I'm not telling you that you can't strive for more or continue to upgrade, but don't attach yourself to that upgrade as if it's going to mean anything different. As the great writer Morgan Housel says, the grass is only greener on the other side when the other side is fertilized in bullshit. I hope you like this different style of video today. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts or comments down below. If you're someone who finds themselves regularly comparing their wealth to others, I have a slightly different type of comparison video for you. Click here to learn where your net worth ranks amongst your retired peers. Thanks for watching, and always remember, you don't need more money, you need a better plan. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.